Page 534. We're on chapter 20, still part 3, volume 2, the dog's service. The title of this chapter was not intended as an intentionally scathing insult, but it is our duty to uphold the camp tradition. If you think about it, they themselves chose this lot. Their service is the same as that of guard dogs, and their service is connected with dogs. And there even exists a special statute on service with dogs, and there are whole officers' committees which monitor the work of an individual dog, fostering a good viciousness in the dog. And if the maintenance of one pup per year costs the people 11,000 pre-Khrushchev rubles, police dogs are fed better than prisoners. Then the maintenance of each officer must cost even more. And then throughout this book we have also had the difficulty of knowing what to call them in general. The administration, the chiefs, are too generalized and relate to freedom as well, to the whole life of the whole country, and they are shop-worn terms anyway. The bosses, likewise, the camp managers, but this is a circumlocution that only demonstrates our impotence. Should they be named straightforwardly in accordance with camp tradition, that would seem crude, profane. It would be fully in the spirit of the language to call them lagershiki, lagernik, camp inmate, as does tirmishik, prison keeper, or tiremnik, prison inmate, and it expresses an exact and unique sense. Those who manage and govern the camps. And so, asking forgiveness of my stricter readers for this new word, and it is not entirely new if a vacant spot was left for it in the language, I shall now on make use of it from time to time. And that is what this chapter is about, the camp keepers and the prison keepers with them. We could begin with the generals. It would be a marvelous thing to do, but we don't have any material. It was quite impossible for us worms and slaves to learn about them and to see them up close. And when we did see them, we were dazzled by the glitter of gold braid and couldn't make anything out. So we really know nothing at all about the chiefs of Gulag, who followed one another in turn, those Tsars of the archipelago. But if we come across a photo of Berman or a word or two of Abder, we seize on it immediately. We know about those Garanin executions, but of Garanin himself, we know nothing. All we do know is that he was not satisfied with simply signing. When he went around the camps, he was not loath to empty his Mauser into whatever mug he took a dislike to. We have written about Kashketin, but we never saw a Kashketin face to face. We never saw that Kashketin face to face, thank God. We managed to collect a little material on Frankel, but not on Zavanyagin. He, the recently deceased, escaped from being buried with the henchmen of Yezhov and Beria, and the newspaper hacks wrote of him, the legendary builder of Norilsk. Did he lay bricks with his own hands? Realizing, however, that from up above Beria loved him dearly, and that from down below him the MVD man Zinoviev spoke highly of him, we supposed he was an out-and-out beast. Otherwise he would not have built Norilsk. As for Antonov, the chief of the Yenisei camp, we can be grateful that the engineer Paboji described him for us. And we would advise everyone to read this portrayal, the unloading of lighters on the Taz River, in the depths of the tundra where the railroad has not yet extended. Will it ever? Egyptian ants are dragging locomotives across the snow, and up above, Antonov stands on a hill, watching over everything and setting them a time limit for unloading. He flew in by air, and he is about to fly out by air immediately. His whole retinue dances around him. Napoleon had nothing like this, and his personal cook sets fresh tomatoes and cucumbers on a folding table right before him in the midst of the Arctic permafrost, and the son of a bitch shares with no one, shoving a whole lot into his own belly. In this chapter, we are going to cover those from Colonel down. We'll chat a little bit about the officers and then go on to the sergeants, briefly cover the infantry guard, and that will be it. Let anyone who has noted more than we did write down more. Our limitation is this: when you are confined in prison or in camp, the personality of the prison keeper interests you only to the extent that it helps you evade their threats and exploit their weaknesses. As far as anything else is concerned, you couldn't care less. They are unworthy of your attention. You are suffering yourself, and those around you who are unjustly imprisoned are suffering, and in comparison with that sheaf of sufferings, which is too much for your outspread hands to encompass, what are these stupid people in their watchdog jobs to you? What are their petty interests to you, their worthless likes and dislikes, their successes and failures in the service? And then later, too late, you suddenly realize that you didn't observe them closely enough. Without even discussing the question of talent, can a person become a jailer in prison or camp if he is capable of the very least kind of useful activity? Let us ask, on the whole, can a camp keeper be a good human being? What system of moral selection does life arrange for them? The first selection takes place on assignment to MVD armies, MVD schools, or MVD courses. Every man with the slightest speck of spiritual training, with a minimally circumspect conscience or capacity to distinguish good from evil, is instinctively going to look back out and use every available means to avoid joining his dark legion. But let us concede that he did not succeed in backing out. A second selection comes during training and the first service assignment, when the bosses themselves take a close look and eliminate all those who manifest laxity, kindness, instead of a strong will and firmness, cruelty and mercilessness. And then a third selection takes place over many years. All those who had not visualized where and into what they were getting themselves now come to understand and are horrified. To be constantly a weapon of violence, a constant participant in evil. Not everyone can bring himself to do this, and certainly not right off. You see, you are trampling others' lives, and instead, yourself something tightens and bursts, and inside yourself something tightens and bursts. You can't go on this way any longer, and although it is belated, men can still begin to fight their way out, report themselves ill, get disability certificates, accept lower pay, take off their shoulder guards, anything to get out. Does that mean that the rest of them have got used to it? Yes, the rest of them have got used to it, and their life already seems normal to them, and useful too, of course, and even honorable, and some didn't have to get used to it. They had been that way from the start. Thanks to this process of selection, one can conclude that the percentage of the merciless and cruel among the camp keepers is much higher than a random sample of the population, and the longer and the more constantly and the more notably a person serves the organs, the more likely it is that he is a scoundrel. We do not lose sight of the lofty words of Dzerzhinsky: whoever among you has become hardened, whose heart cannot respond sensitively and attentively to those who suffer imprisonment, get out of this institution. However, we cannot relate these words in any way to reality. Who was this meant for, and how seriously, considering that he defended Khosrow, Part 1, Chapter 8, and who paid any attention to it? Neither terror as a means of persuasion, nor arrest on the grounds of unreliability, nor the executions of hostages, nor those early concentration camps 15 years before Hitler, gives us the slightest feeling of those sensitive hearts or those knights in shining armor. And if some did leave the organs themselves on their own in those years, then the ones Dzerzhinsky invited to stay could not help but grow hardened, and whoever became hardened, or was hard to begin with, stayed. And maybe a different kind of advice was given on another occasion. We simply don't have the quotations. How adhesive are those fashionable expressions which are inclined to take over and use, which we are inclined to take over and use without thinking or checking them. An old Chekist who has not heard these words drawled with emphasis as a mark of special esteem, if the Czechs wish to distinguish a camp keeper from those who are inexperienced, inclined to fuss, who shout pointlessly and do not have a bulldog grip, they say, and the chief there is a old Chekist, like that major who burned Klumpner's sonata about shackles. The Chekists themselves were the ones who put this term into circulation, and we repeat it without thinking. An old Chekist. What does that mean? What that means at the least is that he was well regarded under Yagoda, Yezhov, and Beria. He was used to them all. Interestingly, Putin apparently refers to himself as a Chekist. But let us not digress and begin to talk about Chekists in general. There has already been one chapter in this book on Chekists in this specific sense, the Chekists of the security operations, interrogation, gendarme persuasion, and the camp keepers merely like to call themselves Chekists, merely aspire to the title, or else have come here from those jobs for arrest, because here their nerves are not subjected to such wear and tear, and their health is not being undermined. Their work here does not require them to either that degree of development or that active pressure of evil demanded back there. In that Chekhov GB, one must be sharp and quick and invariably hit the eye. But in the MBD, it is enough to be dull and not miss the whole skull. To our chagrin, we cannot undertake to explain why the slogan, the proletarianization and the communization of a camp personnel, which was successfully carried out, did not create in the archipelago that fluttering love of man according to Dzerzhinsky. From the very earliest revolutionary years, in courses of the Central Penal Department and the Provincial Penal Departments, the junior administrative staff, in other words, the internal custodial staff, trained for prisons and camps without interrupting work, in other words, on the job, already in prisons and camps. By 1925, only 6% of the Tsarist prison custodial staff remained, what hardened old servitors. And even earlier, the middle-rank camp command staff had become fully Soviet in composition. They continued to study, first at the law faculties of the People's Commissariat of Education, yes, the People's Commissariat of Education, and not faculties of lawlessness either, but of law. From 1931 on, these became the corrective-labor divisions of the law institutes of the People's Commissariat of Justice in Moscow, Leningrad, Kazan, Saratov, and Irkutsk. The graduates were 70% workers in origin and 70% communists. In 1928, by decree of the Council of the People's Commissars and the never objecting VTIK, the powers over the prison regimen of these proletarianized and communized chiefs of places of confinement were expanded still more. Just imagine, love of man somehow did happen. Many more millions of people suffered from then than from the fascists. And they weren't POWs either, nor conquered peoples, but their own compatriots and on their own native soil. And who is going to explain that to us? We can't. Do a similarity of paths in life and a similarity of situations give rise to a similarity in characters? And as a general thing, it doesn't. For people with strong minds and spirits of their own, it does not. They have their own solutions, their own special traits, and they can be very surprising. But among the camp keepers who have passed through a severe negative selection process, both in morality and mentality, the similarity is astonishing, and we can, in all likelihood, describe without difficulty their basic universal characteristics. Arrogance. A camp chief lives on a separate island, flimsily connected with the remote external power, and on this island he is without qualification the first. All the Zeks are abjectly subordinate to him, and all the free employees too. He has the biggest star on his shoulder boards of anywhere. No limits are set to his power, and it admits to no mistake. Every person complaining is always proven wrong, repressed. He has the best house on the island, the best means of transportation. The camp keepers immediately below him in rank are also raised extremely high. And since their whole preceding life has not given birth to any spark of critical capacity inside them, it is impossible for them to see themselves as other than a special race of born rulers. Out of the fact that no one is capable of resisting them, they draw the conclusion that they rule very wisely, and this is their talent, organizational. Every day, each ordinary event permits them visibly to observe their superiority. People rise before them, stand at attention, bow. At their summons, people do not just approach, but run up to them. On their orders, people do not simply leave, but run out. And if he, Dukelsky of Vanlag, walks to the gates to watch the dirty rabble of his workers marching in a column surrounded by police dogs, he is the very image of a plantation owner in a snow-white summer suit. And if they, Ujlag, have taken it in their heads that they would like to ride out on horseback to inspect the work in the potato field, where women dressed in black are struggling and sinking into the mud up to their bellies, trying to dig potatoes, which incidentally were not removed in time and had to be plowed under in the spring for fertilizer. Then these camp keepers are dressed up in gleaming jackboots and in faultless woolen uniforms as they, elegant horsemen, ride past their drowning female slaves like original Olympians. Stupidity always follows on the heels of smugness. Deified alive, each knows everything inside and out. Doesn't need to read or learn, and no one can tell him anything worth pausing over. Among the Sakhalin officials, Chekhov met clever, energetic men with scholarly leanings who had studied the locality and local life thoroughly, and who had in fact written geographical and ethnographical studies. But even for a laugh, it is impossible to imagine one such camp keeper in the whole archipelago. And if Kudlati, the chief of one of the Ustvin work parties, decided that a 100% fulfillment of state norms, work norms, was not 100% at all, and that instead what had to be fulfilled was his own daily norm taken out of his head, and that otherwise he would put everybody on a penalty ration, there was no way to get him to change his mind. So having fulfilled 100% piles with volumes of Lenin, having fulfilled 100%, they all got penalty rations, In Kudlaty's office, there were whole piles of volumes of Lenin. He summoned V.G. Vlasov and informed him. Lenin writes what attitude one must take toward parasites. He understood parasites to mean prisoners who had fulfilled the work norm by only 100%, two things that fitted into their heads simultaneously. He understood parasites to mean prisoners who had fulfilled the work norm by only 100%, and he understood the term proletariat himself. These two things fitted into their heads simultaneously. Here's my state, and I am proletarian. But the old serf-owning gentry were incomparably better educated. Many of them had studied in St. Petersburg, and some of them even in Göttingen. From them, after all, came the Aksakovs, the Radishevs, and the Turgenevs. But no one ever emerged from our MVD men, and no one ever will. And the main thing was that the serf owners either governed their estates themselves, or at least understood a tiny part of their estate operation. But the presumptuous MVD officers, with all kinds of state benefits showered on them, just could not take on themselves the additional burden of business management. They were too lazy for that and too stupid. They wrapped their inane idleness in a fog of severity and secrecy, and as it turned out, the state was compelled to erect alongside their whole gold-shoulder-boarded hierarchy, a second such hierarchy out of the trust of combines, autocracy, auto-tyranny. In this respect, the camp keepers were fully the equals of the very worst of the serf owners of the 18th and 19th centuries. Innumerable are the examples of senseless orders, the sole purpose of which was to demonstrate their power. And the farther into Siberia and the north they were, the truer this was. But even in Khimki, just outside Moscow, today it's in Moscow, Major Volkov noticed on May 1st that the Czechs were not cheerful, and he issued orders. Everyone must cheer up immediately. Anybody I see unhappy will go up to the punishment block. And to jolly up the engineers, he sent a third-term girl thieves to sing them obscene ditties. People will say that this was not tyranny but a political measure, so all right. They brought a prisoner transport to that same camp. One of the newcomers, Ivanovsky, was presented as a dancer of the Bolshoi theater. What, a performer, Volkov raged. 20 days in the punishment block. Go by yourself and report to the chief of the penalty isolator. After some time, he passed the telephone. Is a performer there? He is. Did he come on his own? He did. Well then, let him out. I am appointing him assistant to the commandant. And that same Volkov, as we have already mentioned, ordered a woman's head shaved because she had beautiful hair. The surgeon, Fuster, a Spaniard, did not play up to the camp chief, sent him to the stone quarry. They did soon after the camp chief himself fell ill and needed an operation. There were other surgeons. He could have gone to a central Moscow hospital, but no, he had faith only in Fuster. Bring him back from the quarry. You are going to operate on me, but he died under the knife. And one camp thief made a real find. It turned out that a Czech geological engineer, Kazakh, possessed an operatic tenor voice. Before the revolution, he had studied in Petersburg with the Italian teacher Repetto, and The camp chief also discovered that he himself had a voice. It was 1941-42, and the war was going on somewhere, but the camp chief was well protected from the military service by his exemption. He took singing lessons from his serf. The latter was sickly and dying, and was making inquiries in an effort to locate his wife, while his wife, O.P. Kazakh, in exile, was trying to find her husband through Gulag. The search documents came together in the chief's hands, and he could have helped them re-establish communication. However, he did not do this. Why not? He reassured Kazakh that his wife had been exiled and was living well. Formerly a teacher, she worked first as a chairwoman in the grain procurement office and subsequently on a collective farm, and he continued to take his singing lessons. And when in 1943 Kazakh was at death's door, the camp chief spared him, helped him get released because of his illness, and let him go to his wife to die. So he was not really a vicious chief. A sense of possessing a patrimonial estate is typical of all camp chiefs. They perceived their camp not as a part of some state system, but as a patrimonial estate, entrusted them indivisibly for as long as they occupied their positions. Hence came all the tyranny over lives, over personalities, and hence also came the bragging among themselves. The chief of one of the Kangir camps said, "I've got a professor working in the baths." But the chief of another camp, Captain Sadnikov, put him down with, "And in my camp, I've got an academician, barracks orderly, who carries out latrine barrels." Greed and money grabbing among the camp keepers, this was the most widespread trait of all. Not everyone was stupid, and not everyone was a petty tyrant, but every last one was engaged in attempting to enrich himself from the free labor of the zeks and from the state property. Whether he was the chief in the camp or one of his aides, neither I nor any of my friends could recollect any disinterested camp keeper, nor have any of the zeks who have been corresponding with me ever named one. In their greed to grab as much as possible, none of their multitudinous legitimate monetary advantages and privileges could satisfy them. Neither high pay, with double and triple bonuses for work in the Arctic in remote areas for dangerous work, nor prize money for provided management executives of camp by Article 79 of the Corrective-Labor Code of 1933. That same code did not hinder them from establishing a 12-hour workday without any Sundays for the prisoners, nor the exceptionally advantageous calculation of their seniority in the north, where half the archipelago was located. 1 year of work counted as 2, and the total required for military personnel to earn a pension was 20 years. Thus, an MVD officer on completing MVD school at age 22 could retire on a full pension and go live at Sochi at 32. No, yet every channel, meager or abundant, through which free services, food products, or objects could flow, was always used by every camp keeper graspingly and gulpingly. Even back on Solovki, the chiefs had begun to expropriate cooks, laundresses, stable boys, woodcutters from among the prisoners, and from then on there was never any end, from up above, never any prohibition against this profitable custom. So the camp keepers also took for themselves cattle herdsmen, gardeners, or teachers for their children. And in the years of the most strident outcry about equality and socialism, in 1933, for example, any free employee in Van Lake, for a minuscule payment to the camp cashier, could acquire a personal servant from among the prisoners. In Knyaz Pogost, Aunt Manya Utkina looked after the cow of the camp chief, and for this was rewarded with a glass of milk per day, and under the Gulag way of life this was real generosity, and it would have been more likely in the Gulag way of life for that cow not to belong to the chief, but to be kept for improving the diet of the sick, but the milk would have kept on going to the chief, not by the glass either, but by the pailful and the bagful. Everyone who could possibly get fed off the rations of the prisoners did so on principle. Read over, dear reader, Lipai's letter in chapter 9. Above, the outcry one would gather of a former storeroom clerk. After all, it was not out of hunger, not out of need, not out of poverty, that those Kuragins, those Pasushapkas, and those Ignachenkos hauled out bags and barrels from the storeroom, but very simply thus: why shouldn't they enrich themselves at the expense of a mute, defenseless, starving slaves? And all the more so during wartime, when everyone else around was grabbing. Anyway, if you didn't live that way, everyone would laugh at you. I'm not even going to make a special issue here of their betrayal of trustees who used to catch it because of the shortages, and the Kolima prisoners, remember, who was in a position to steal from the common food pot of the prisoners, the camp chief, the chief of regiment, the chief of the cultural and educational section, the free employees, the duty jailers, all invariably stole. And the gatehouse guards swiped sweetened tea at the gatehouse, even just a spoonful of sugar, and just so as to eat off the prisoners. Just what you take from a dying man is sweeter. Well, thank you for listening. Have a good day.